Hey, welcome back to Learning to Weave. Today we're going to be slaying our reed, and we're going to be doing this for a plain weave and a twill. 96 ends, 48 ends of each color. Bear with me about the basement lighting. We'll get through it. So before we begin actually slaying our reed or cutting any of our yarn or taking off the ties, we're actually going to secure our beater. Some looms have really neat notches that allow them to be secured. Some do not. This one does not. I'm just going to assume that no one's does. So I'll show you how to secure it. So cut 4 pieces of string that are 2 feet long or so, and hold your beater like this. I'm going to start with my top piece, and I chose a piece of string that's not long enough, so I'm going to choose a different one now. Let's try this one. Okay, so you just want to loop a piece of string around this opening in your beater, and then also around the pole that connects your breast beam. And you want it to be pretty much straight, that has equal spacing between the breast beam and between the castle. And this you'll want to tie in a knot, something that's nice and secure, like that. And then you'll do it again on the opposite side, connecting your castle to your beater. So you'll loop it through again, and then you just tie that piece as well. And then once I've tied this piece, I'm gonna do it for the other side. And all this does is it helps us have enough space while we're actually threading the reed so we can fit our hand in behind here. And then when we start threading the heddles, it gives us space to actually see what's going on. So I'm gonna do the other side, and then we'll get started with slaying. Now that we have our yarn tied to our breast beam here, or looped around it rather, we're ready to begin the process of slaying the reed. So I'm gonna start with my red just because it's a little easier to see. So I'm just gonna let my yellow rest down here. All right, so if you remember, we made a cross whenever we were warping our yarn. So it's a little funky. Okay, so you remember we made our cross. Our cross looks like this. We tied an extra secure string right here so you would be able to make sure it stays in place. Luckily it has, good for us. So this next part is pretty crucial, so we want to keep that cross. So to do that, there's a very specific way that we actually hold our hand. So since I'm right-handed, I'll hold my yarn, my warp, in my left hand. And so to do that, we want to droop our warp over really gently. Okay, so I have my ring finger in with my little finger, my pinky finger, and it's down in the bottom loop, okay? My middle finger is outside and it's securing the cross right here. And then my pointer finger is up on the top loop. So if you see it, we're all holding on to all of our yarn. My thumb is here just as extra support, okay? So that's the way we're going to be holding it this whole time. Very important. So what we want to do is we want to cut this. I've lost my scissors. All right, so I found my scissors. I'm gonna go back to holding my warp the way that I instructed you all. Okay, again, we have a ring finger down here, middle finger at the cross, and then the ring finger up at the top. And my thumb is just hanging out. You might also find it comfortable to have your ring finger at the cross, your middle finger here, and then holding it that way. It's just personal preference, whatever works for you. You might try it both ways. Okay. So like I said, I'm going to cut our top of our warp here. So my holding threads are still together, and I'm just going to cut like that. I know, it's scary. All right, so now we have our ends. Again, we're gonna get into holding formation. You'll want to determine which way is your top and which way is your bottom. So it's just the top, or whatever you're going to be using, is just right here up close to you. So, okay, our threads are separate. See how our cross kept them separate? Amazing. So now I'm going to begin the crucial process of untying these pieces. Very nerve-wracking. If you tied them in knots, it's probably easier to cut them. Just make sure you don't cut your other strings. Now for the cross untying, once you start this process, you really don't want to be setting this piece down. So make sure you've ran to the restroom, you've texted whoever you need to text, and you're ready to rock and roll. Okay, so here we are, we're undone, we're good to go. So looking at our reed, we want to make sure that it's approximately centered. The good news is that this actually moves back and forth. You can unscrew these pieces because we want to have a centered warp once we're done. So it's nice and balanced, it has even tension. So you can measure it. There's like usually a screw in the middle that kind of shows you where your center is. My reed's already a little off. So if I want this to be about the middle, and I know my scarf is about this wide, I'm just gonna start here. But again, there's a better way you can measure it. You can actually figure out your ends per inch, figure out what reed you're in, and then you don't have to deal with centering it later, but I prefer to just dive in. Like I said, I'm starting with one color. Looking at my reed, I'm gonna take my slaying hook, which mine is a card with a notch in it. Yours might be a real slaying hook. And you just want something that can go through the reed, because what we'll be doing is we'll be pulling this yarn through it. So I'm gonna set that just like that. So you want to start now by taking the piece of thread that's on the top. So for me, it's this one, and I'm just going to keep the rest secured with my thumb, and I'm just going to pull it like that. And this first piece was my starter, so I'm just going to actually, can I pull it? Okay, yep, so tore it off, yippee, cool beans. So now this is free from the big piece. I'm gonna start on the right side here. I'm taking my first piece of yarn, and I'm gonna start approximately here because I know that's about where I wanna be. And I'm gonna take my arm and sit it on top of the beater, and the beater's secure. This is why we want it secure so it doesn't sling us everywhere. And I'm just gonna insert my slaying hook into one of the notches, and then I'm gonna put my yarn into the slaying hook notch. And then you make sure it's grabbed, make sure you're still holding onto your cross, and then you just pull that piece of string through. And now it's through. Okay, we want it to just kind of droop in there. So we're going to be doing this again. So now I'm going to take the next one. You kind of have to look and see. So for me, my next one, the next one that's on top of the cross here, just going to slowly grab it and yank it out. Make sure I'm still holding on to everybody else. Okay, so now that's free. I'm gonna get it out of this mess of yarn and then pull it a little bit from down there. And this loop here is saving us, making sure nothing slips or anything. Okay, so now that's free. I'm still holding onto my cross. Gonna grab the end of that. And now I'm gonna start on the exact next reed, the next open space. I'm gonna slide my hook into that. And then I'm going to secure my yarn on the notch and then pull that through as well. And then pull it through. This is super important. Make sure that you're not skipping any dents at all, because that'll make your pattern uneven. It'll create holes in your weave. So this is really, really, really important, really key. So I'm gonna do the next one, grabbing one that's on top. By on top, I mean it's literally the one that's on top of the cross here. Okay, I like to loop my thumb underneath it. Everybody else is secure, and then I can grab that one out, shake it loose a little bit, and then still holding onto my cross. And I'm gonna look for the next open dent. Okay, the one that's right beside it, pulling it through. Okay, I'll do one more here, because if you remember, our sample that we're actually weaving is a striped or a checked kind of design. We have two colors. So let me pull that out, still holding onto my cross. So the reason why it's crossed or checked is because of how we are slaying our reed and threading our heddles right now. So once we have 4 groups of our first color, four pieces of our warp here in a row, now we're going to count very carefully, and we're going to count 4 gaps, because those 4 gaps will be our second color. So we'll count, and you have to look really carefully, really closely. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you're going to start on the fifth one over. So I'm going to grab my next bit of warp that's on the top of the cross, pull it out, and then I will do the process again, where I'll grab the color, grab my slaying hook, and then pull it through. And then once you've done that, you can look really closely and you see that you have 4 open spots for where your next color will go. So you'll keep doing that. You'll thread 4, skip 4, slay 4, skip 4, slay 4, skip 4. So I'm going to go quickly and do it now, but please take your time and make sure you slay it correctly, because it's much more difficult and more time consuming to unthread everything and then make sure we're not skipping any gaps here. Okay, so now I have slayed the first color. Here's a close-up of the reed. You can see that I have my yarn separated into groups of 4, and I'm doing this so that way my yellow color can actually go into those secondary groups. So up close and personal, you can see that every thread is in its own little reed space, and each thread has 4 gaps in between it. So that's for the whole entire way. And as you can see, it's relatively centered, and I will fix it later. And that's the important thing, is that you can fix it later. So now I'm going to start with my yellow. I'm going to repeat the same exact process, starting from right to left, holding the yarn in my left hand, and I will fill in the gaps. Okay, so I've finished slaying. I'll do a close-up so you can see how it looks. It might be a little chaotic looking, but I promise it'll all come out and it'll be fine. I actually made a mistake, so I ended up not having enough ends from my yellow. So I'm 2 ends short. So that means I actually need to go back to the warping board, and I'm just going to make an extra 2 of my ends. And I'll show you what that looks like. It's not a big deal. We'll make it work. But if you do run into this problem, it's an easy fix, and we'll just thread it in like normal, and then we'll just be a little more careful as we're actually warping our loom. So I am missing a couple of ends on my weaving project, so I'm actually going to go ahead and warp my ends again. I'm going to do 2 warps. So that'll mean that I'll just be following this along for 2 times. So you just to the end, and then you loop around and you do it again. And there's really no need to tie off this time. We just need the length here, and then we'll go back and we'll just slay those, and then as we're dressing our loom further, we'll just be mindful of these additional ends that are here. Okay, so I'm just gonna take care of these extra 2 ends that I have. So what I've done is I took them off of the warping board, and I tied a little knot in the end, just like whenever we were warping like normal. And I am just going to do the chain like we did before, just to keep it together so nothing gets confusing. Okay. Just enough to make it not so long. Okay. And then we're going to just wrap these parts around just like the others on our breast beam. Make sure they're long enough that they're going to reach through everything as well. Okay, and then we have our two ends up here. And I just want to make sure I don't have any knots from where we tied off, just so it fits through the reed. Okay. And then we'll just slay them through like we would any other time. Since there's only two, it's really easy. You don't really get them confused. That's why there's no need for a cross. So I'm just gonna pull those in. So yeah, all mistakes you make are fixable in weaving. This is a testament to that. It's not a big deal. We fixed it in 10 minutes or so. Okay, so now everything is slayed properly. We have our little extra fun piece there. So now I'm just going to work on these ends back here. So I'll move the camera so you can see everything. Okay, so this is the back of our reed here. So everything is kind of chaotic, but what we're gonna do is we're actually going to take two groups. So we'll take one red and one gold, or whatever your colors are, and we're just going to kind of straighten them out a little bit. Make sure they're pulled kind of tight. That's why we have it looped here on the breast beam. We want to pull them tight through the reed. Okay, get those ends nice and neater. And then we're just gonna tie just a loop, not a knot, but just something to keep them together. Okay, I realized you could not see the knot that I was tying, or the fake knot that I was tying. So I'm just gonna show you again. Okay, so we want to take our 8 ends, our 2 groupings of 4, and straighten out our yarn. Be patient with your yarn. If you pull too hard, it does rip because it's wool based. So a gentle touch goes a long way. Okay, so now we're all about the same length. So there's 2 different ways you can do this. Well, there's a lot of different ways, but the ways that are probably easiest are to make like a slip knot, basically. So I have my yarn over my fingers like this, and I basically just give myself a loop by twisting my hand. So then I have this ribbon shape kind of thing here, and then I just pull that yarn through here and just pull up, and then I have this knot that goes back and forth. It also can be pulled out like that, very easy. Another option, if you want to, is you can just tie a very basic bow, just like that. And again, that you can just pull out like that. So I'll show you that one again. Make your bunny ear, twist around, bring it through this hole, and then pull both bunny ears. And we want this because it holds up against the reed so that yarn doesn't come out that we've already slayed, because we don't want our hard work to go to waste. So there's that. I'm going to do all of that right now. Okay, we've done it. We've slayed our reeds. So next time we will be threading our heddles. To do that, we'll actually be taking off or taking down the back part of the loom so we can actually sit behind it. Every loom is different, so it'll look a little different for yours, but in the meantime, finish slaying your reed, tie your ends, and we'll get ready to thread our heddles. So for you all in Weaving 1, next class period, we'll be working on threading our heddles. So stay tuned.